Welcome, welcome, guys. Susan, Nicole, Marco, Melanie, David, Alyssa, I see you guys hopping on. Hello, hello. Ooh, you guys must be excited about this because these attendee numbers are going up. We're so excited to have you guys. I'm just going to give it about a minute just so everybody that is attending the session can see it from start to finish. So bear with me, guys, just 30 seconds and we will go ahead and kick this off. All right. Okay, guys, it's 2:31. If anybody else is just coming in right now, welcome, welcome. My name is Ariel Rafua. I work with the Texas Restaurant Association. I definitely want to welcome you guys to the virtual TRA Marketplace 2020. We're so happy that we were able to transition this to a virtual marketplace. And today's session is called State of the Industry. It is going to be a treat with Kelly, who I will introduce in a minute. I do want to remind everybody that if you have any questions throughout this webinar, feel free to ask it in the Q&A button right there. If she happens to answer any questions, definitely, great, but we will make sure to get to them at the very end. We're going to leave some time for it. And without further delay, guys, I'd definitely like to thank Coca-Cola Southwest Beverages. I have a Coke can officially now for everybody, and Kelly does too. So thank you, Coke, for sponsoring this virtual stage, Silicon Hills. We'll see you guys all week on this stage. We'll be drinking a lot of Coca-Cola, and we'd like to play a quick video for you guys. Just hold tight.
We may be one of the world's most familiar companies, but we make more than our name suggests. We're an organic tea company, a premium juice company, a coconut water company. We've got drinks for long days, for birthdays, for turning over new leaves. And we make them for every moment in every corner of the country. We are the Coca-Cola Company, and we're proud to offer so much more.
Oh, guys, Coca-Cola, go grab one if you have one in the fridge, and stay tuned for this awesome webinar. I'd like to introduce to you guys Kelly Villade, sorry, I had Vallejo, which is the CEO and president of Black Box, and give a round of applause. Thank you so much, Kelly, for joining us today.
Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen right off the bat. I am so thrilled to be with you today, drinking my Coca-Cola, and thank you also to Coca-Cola for doing this. It's just awesome to be with you today, and I'm thrilled to be able to share the insights and the data that we have at Black Box Intelligence and talk to you about what we're seeing in this really crazy time. Our mission, as I will go through this in a second, just a little bit more about who we are, but our mission is really, we're about helping restaurant operators. I am the president and CEO of Black Box Intelligence. We are a small, but there we go. We are a small but mighty firm here in Dallas, Texas, with 4 products that are basically all about helping the industry get better. We have products that are benchmarked to show our clients and our customers in the restaurant industry. And those clients, by the way, are basically micro, macro chains. We don't work with as many independents, but you can really take our data. It's real sales and traffic data, real workforce data. Customers come to us sharing their data with us so that we in turn can tell them what's happening in the industry, what trends are happening. It allows our customers to be able to see how they're doing in a specific market against other brands, et cetera. So we've built a long history that we are a 25-year-old company. I'd like to say we're small and nimble, but we are mighty in the way of the amount of data that we have. We represent 290 brands, and we have lots of employees represented in this database and lots to go on so that we really can tell a full story. There are, in contrast, there's amazing, great survey data out there. The National Restaurant Association, for example, has fantastic survey data that's out there with expectations of what, or answers to what is actually happening for customers and for independent operators and across the country. Our data is actually based on that real data that's coming from our customers. And so it really, we represent all segments, so it really does tell the entire story. So our purpose is to reveal insights, unlock potential for brands, and enrich lives. We are incredibly passionate and all about helping operators' lives be better. It's been my passion, my life's work. It's the only industry I've ever worked in. And I'm incredibly passionate about it, as is our entire team. Before being at Black Box Intelligence, I spent 22 years at Brinker International. I was on the Chili's Grill and Bar team. I was the brand president, and before that, chief operating officer. So operations is where my heart and my passion are, and that really kind of shines through with our entire team. So thrilled to be here today, and thrilled to be talking about this kind of not so wonderful topic, but yet it is where we are. And it is about how to help you all get better. And my hope is you take a lot away from this in the way of what's really happening with the data, both on the workforce, the guest, and on sales and traffic data. So we will go through that in a lot of detail. I have a good amount of time to do it. I'm going to work through it at a pretty quick clip so that we do try and save time for some questions at the end. So I'll talk about what the latest data shows. I'll talk to you about what's happening to employees through this crisis, what happened to the recovery, and then what I see for the road ahead. Many of our clients are now saying, and I'm sure you are as well, what do I do next? It is, we've gone from shock in the very beginning to how do I survive to can I sustain this? I think we are all exhausted by this because the duration is what has been the biggest surprise, to how do I plan for 2021 because it is now planning season. So I'll talk about the road ahead and perhaps the ever-changed restaurant industry. Duration is the enemy. That's my way of just saying that's been the surprise for everyone when it first hit. Again, shock first, and then wow, here we are in August sending our children back to school and thinking about what do we do next? And starting planning seasons, thinking, how do you now sustain and thrive in this era of COVID? And some are doing that. There will continue to be, really, there are the haves and have-nots. Some are impacted differently and worse than others, depending on the state, depending on the segment. That will likely continue, unfortunately. But you'll see everyone has been profoundly impacted, and everyone is reacting in a way that makes the most sense for their brand and for their customers and employees. So here's the data. By the data, here's what's happening in the industry, total industry. You can see that when we hit the very low lows, I like to say that not only in March, mid-March was when the president announced and his task force announced that you should avoid restaurants. It's also when Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson got the virus, which made it all very real. I know it did in my house. My household. So this is what's been happening. We've tracked it week by week. We've even tracked it daily to be able to really show the kind of recovery that was happening. You'll see, I'm going to do a couple things to call out Texas. You guys have sponsored this. Obviously, we are in the TRA marketplace. And so I want to make sure to call specific things out. So this is the first of one of my calls. You'll see Texas, Georgia, and Florida were one of the first right there in the middle to open up earlier, or to open back up at limited capacity. That helped the trend, the trajectory for the industry as a whole, and also helped Texas for a while. As of late, you'll see Texas numbers starting to show a bigger gap to the industry because of the escalation, unfortunately, in cases. So with that, we can see this last week, I can tell you, was 13.5 down. So a little bit of movement in a positive direction from -14 the end of July to this last week. Our most recent data showing -13.5. So progress nonetheless. It's been slow and steady, and it's had a lot of fits and starts, obviously. Texas, as I just said, was kind of helping to pull the industry as a whole and pull other states, but perhaps because opening early, perhaps just because there have been more cases, and perhaps because we've had to go back from where we were, 75 back down to 50, you can see now Texas lagging. And so if you think about what's been happening pre and post COVID, what you would see here is it's really been 21%. Now I'm going to show you the breakdown of that. And you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, 20% for Texas, 26 Florida, California, much worse, rather, not worser, but much worse. Obviously, size of the state, penetration, the amount of and type of concepts all make a difference when it comes to this. But that's what it is kind of pre and post. When I start to break it down pre-COVID, this is a much prettier slide. This is what life was like, if you can remember it, pre-COVID. And this is Texas only on this one. It mirrors what's been happening in the US with a slight difference in that what you saw in January, February for 2020 in Texas was a little weaker than the rest of the US, primarily because there was great weather in the rest of the US, and Texas, the lap year over year wasn't necessarily helping Texas all that much, but it was helping the rest of the country. So in fact, you saw January, February for Texas a little bit lower than what we saw in the US, but this trajectory and the COVID impact is very similar, with a little bit lagging, as I just showed you now. The majority of information and insights here is really about showing you the comp dine-in sales versus the off-premise sales and how they have moved. Conversely, obviously, when restaurants, full-service restaurants in particular, had to close down and close their dining rooms, you saw the trade-off, immediate trade-off to off-premise, and you've seen that move and move with the dining rooms opening back up and just move with the numbers of viruses, really. So that's been the story for those that had a lot of off-premise to begin with, drive-throughs, quick service, didn't really rely on dining rooms. They're obviously been doing better. That's not a big headline that you haven't seen. But what we've been doing ever since it started, we really do break it down week in, week out by segments. And we are obviously showing you exactly what's been happening. You can see the differences by segment. Quick service has been doing the best. Fast casual has bounced around a little bit, but not nearly as negative as some of the others, especially in family dining, upscale casual, or fine dining. Again, for obvious reasons, this has been the tale of two cities. And you can see 72%, we now cut this by the sales mix. So percent of total sales. So your off-premise sales is a percent of your total sales. And what we see obviously is that with a limited service concept, either a QSR brand or a fast casual brand, they had very high off-premise mix because of drive-throughs and very limited dining room space anyway, where you see in full service going from 14 to almost 100% of their sales being off-premise to now back down to 39 as dining rooms have reopened. One of the questions we get a lot now is this going to stay this way when dining rooms reopen? And imagine, and we know they're only open at 50% right now, but when they reopen, when this goes back to normal, will people use off-premise to the same extent? Our answer, and it'll come up a couple different times, is not really. It will still be higher than it was. Therefore, I mean that it'll be higher than 72 for limited and higher than 14. It's going to stay elevated, but people will trade back to dine-in where possible, at least in full service. And I think we'll see that over time. It's just going to be a slow build. The growth in off-premise, the team of our great analysts have looked at this also by dollar, to look at a dollar spent in February versus what's happening today, and the mix of off-premise versus on-premise. And as you can see, the growth in off-premise is not enough to offset the deep declines and the dollars in spending that has happened. Limited service, because of family bundles or adding the bigger drink or a half gallon of tea or adding a dessert to the bundle, has been able to offset it more because of that sales check growth that full service has not been able to overcome, because obviously in full service restaurants, they lost the ability to sell alcohol. So quick service especially has been able to offset that a lot more, almost overcoming that dollar lost, that dollar in February. Sales are still worse in the initial outbreak states. This has been the case. I've waited for this graph to change and this map to change, because we're asked this a lot. And I know we've got representatives from other states here on in this marketplace, which is awesome. We've looked at this a lot and it really has not changed. The states hit the hardest are New York, California, the original outbreak state in Washington, and then some of the other, kind of Midwest and Plains states. Florida, Texas, they've gotten a little bit darker in shade, meaning their sales have gotten worse, as I showed, but they are still not the worst in the entire country. And this is as of July. This I'm showing a specific to Texas cut that we did, but this is not really different for the entire US. Mid-afternoon sales, and by this I don't mean happy hour necessarily, but mid-afternoon coffees, juices, mid-afternoon snacks continue to be. They were stronger before. It was a day part that had been growing before, but it is definitely still getting better and better each time now. And you can imagine, I would say this is less about segment, although obviously your quick service, fast casual segments are going to play more into this mid-afternoon snack day part, but there's still a chance for full service to try and capture that as well. It is, how do I get something easy to take out or pick up, or how do I get a refreshing drink in the middle of the day when I'm in my 5th Zoom call for the day and I just want to walk outside my house, get in the car, go grab something. So that was something that had been growing proportionally before, and it's still growing today and strengthening. So I think this graph reflects work from home lifestyles much more than anything else does right now, just in terms of where that growth is. Late night sales, going to bars, it's not a big surprise that that's weakest, and even breakfast and lunch is not a surprise either. So that's the kind of macro industry, some numbers by the segments, some numbers by the day parts, as I've just shown you, some numbers by Texas. This is a little bit even broader to just talk about how the consumer has behaved and what they're doing now. This is from our consumer intelligence product where we're collecting credit card data. So also real data that absolutely will give you a sense for where, when they're not spending money in restaurants, where are they spending money? The winning categories right now, here's an interesting fun fact. The winning categories for the US, this is Texas, but for the US, wine and liquor was number 6. When you look at and cut it by Texas only, wine and liquor is number 3. I think that would say that we perhaps are drinking even a little bit more than the rest of the country here in Texas for whatever reason. But you can see the growth categories, and what you don't see is restaurants. You don't see that on the top 10. You do see wine and liquor, and of course online grocery is not a big surprise. And you see in the biggest losing categories on this scale, you do see full service restaurants. Limited service would be at about 22 nationwide and about number 22 in Texas. Limited service, in fact, again, back to the haves and have-nots, limited service is the only winner in the leisure category when we pull in airlines, hotels, and other verticals and other segments that have been so badly battered by COVID. Limited service does pop up. It's really been able to deliver during this crisis. And then grocery stores have obviously taken a ton of share since this all started. We all remember, although it feels like it was a while ago, the hoarding of toilet paper and the going to restaurants thinking we'll never be able to go back to a restaurant, certainly a dine-in restaurant, or we won't anytime soon. So groceries really took a lot of share. That's bounced back a little bit as of late. Online grocery, we get asked a lot of questions about the future of that and how much bigger that will be. It is important to note this is total share of wallet. And when you look at this, online grocery is only 1.9% of all share in food spending. So it's really small. It's grown. It's actually shrunken. It went down a little bit May through July, but it's not that big. And this does include Amazon Fresh Cart. So we're constantly checking to see, is that online grocery meal kit, share of wallet growing significantly? Is it a threat to restaurants and grocery? And right now it's still pretty small, although obviously more people are adopting it than ever before. We looked at the cohorts of spending, and for those that have 18 to 24 or 18 to 34 is the sweet spot for a lot of restaurant companies in terms of where most of your customers are coming from. Certainly Limited and QSR have a lot more 18 to 24 or 18 to 34. Here we just looked at, this is primarily Gen Z on the left, and their spending is almost back to where it was before. Conversely, if you look at what would be baby boomers at basically 55 and over, they have yet to recover. And of course, some of that may be, the high risk categories at 65 and over, but nonetheless, those baby boomers who a lot of casual diners are responsible for in terms of target audience, they're not doing nearly as well. And then this is interesting. This could be stimulus check. That's a reason for this, but high income spend, this could also have to do with high income spend in corporate accounts or events or travel spend that is obviously non-existent, but high income, the higher the income, the spend is not really rebound as much as it has for the less than 40,000 households, which is just, we found very, very interesting. And then the employees. So as I said, only we are in a great unique position to be able to talk about the workforce impact. I just showed you the consumer impact with real data. And now here's some of the things that we know are happening, both from, these are unemployment numbers, to our actual numbers that we are tracking in our database. Unemployment, we know, is much there's much more loss than can be seen just in these unemployment numbers because of furloughs and because of all the craziness that happened in really the first 30 to 45 days of the pandemic. Unemployment just doesn't do it justice. We know the loss is much greater, and yet these are the highest unemployment claims that we've seen in decades. Restaurants absolutely had to reduce their staff, and they did that in limited service, but really almost only half as much as they had to in full service for the obvious reasons of the dining rooms being shut down and having that much more staff. There are still 2.6 million jobs lost in food and drinking establishments, and we know that to be true. And then when we looked at our data internally to really look at headcount changes, par levels per restaurant, we found that in limited service, QSR and fast casual, they're actually adding staff. And in full service, not a huge surprise. Again, that's where the losses are. They're obviously down and decreasing in staff per unit. The other thing that's happening here that we know is there are other industries that are starting to offer more. Amazon, for example, offering more, and that's going to really compete for this same staff that we obviously need to come back to work. This slide is the one that worries me when I think about Amazon, because the base pay has decreased a decent amount or really close for limited service. Boy, you get into full service, you just can see that given everything that's been happening, it's been a little bit tougher. So that base pay decreasing will not help the staffing situation. We looked at Texas as well. For general managers, pretty much on par with the US, and obviously we know cost of living is obviously considered here, as well as standard of living and minimum wage on this next slide, where we show that Texas hourly wage is below the US. Most of that is driven by obviously minimum wage. We did not do tip credits here. This is only back of the house when you look at line crew. Or when you look at limited service crew, full service when you look at line cook. Employees, so here's just a little bit of our thinking as we look at this, because we are often, the one bringing the employee voice through our data to the forefront, and this is no exception in what's been happening with COVID. We know employees need you now more than ever because the model is shifting. They are dealing with the same things all of us are dealing with. And on top of that, being on the front lines today means they're dealing with a lot of political views, a lot of people that don't agree with the stance being taken by the company. And it's just putting them in harm's way. They're also worried about being safe when they go to work. So there's a lot happening for all those employees that we so desperately need, to get this thing back where it needs to be. The loneliness epidemic is something I've talked about for many, many years, in that this is started in a 2018, this is survey data, 2018 Cigna survey on health and well-being was 50% just a couple short years ago, 60 in 2019. I can only imagine what this will look like post-COVID or in the COVID era, because loneliness had to do with just feeling disconnected before. Now we're truly isolated and physically disconnected just to a great extent. So they're dealing with that as well. They're dealing with social unrest, just like all of us are, after the death of George Floyd and everything that's been happening. They want to know their companies stand for the right things, and they want to know that their company is doing, not just stands for, but is doing the right things. These are comments we found out in our social platform, Guest Intelligence. So they're dealing with a lot. And my challenge would be that the workforce model was in fact challenged before COVID. We were seeing staffing levels at all-time lows in terms of surveying our own and looking at our own data and seeing that the restaurant industry really was plagued by understaffing, especially in the heart of the house before this. Understaffing in the front of the house, understaffing at the general manager role. We found many, many vacancies, many companies saying, well, yeah, we've got too many openings, too many vacancies. And that was before COVID. So this is a model that has needed a ton of work and now is even more complicated by COVID and by everything that I just showed. So really just a lot to think about in terms of what it will take to fix it. And it's going to take just as much energy to fix that as it will the rest of the model. As it will getting guests back in the door, it will be about how do I fix the employee model. So what happened to the recovery? So research initially, and I think that's how we start this, research initially, this is McKinsey data that said, hey, this will be kind of a U-shaped curve. We're circling A1 because we think it's absolutely following more of a fits and starts. It's not absolutely a smooth curve. It's a recovery nonetheless is underway, but it's definitely going to take longer and it's going to be a little bit bumpier, as you can see here. We do know that 10% of restaurants still close nationally. Now, let me make sure to tell you where we get that. That's from our data, working with micro and macro chains. We've tried to track this as best we can with partners that we work with in the industry to understand what that looks like for independents. We think that's higher for independents. Naturally, that's what everyone has talked about in terms of the ones that will really suffer, and that's probably true. Unfortunately, is smaller businesses suffering more. But this reflects our database and the amount of restaurants that we're showing still closed in both full and then limited. And then there are 37 states, and you can see just by the legend here, 37 states that have greater than 10% of restaurants closed. So there's just a lot of casualties here that have still not quite been felt. You do have in Texas more dining rooms currently open. So we think that's encouraging just in the way of looking at the data across, and it may be a reason for a little bit stronger sales coming out of the gate for Texas, a little bit lagging as of right now. What is not helping this recovery, and the reason it is more of a bumpy curve of recovery, is surveys like this or research like this that comes out, and I'm not saying it's inaccurate, but research like this that comes out, and the more we've learned about it, the more this kind of information comes out to help and protect the public, which is why we have to do everything possible to be promoting how safe we are in restaurants. But when you see outdoor dining, kind of low, but on the high end of low risk, looking at eating in a restaurant indoors, almost in the high category, but certainly medium to high. And then things like going to an indoor bar all the way to the right, and basically one of the highest, most riskiest things you could do. It does not help the recovery. And I know everyone on this call knows that. The other thing that's been happening, great mindset, consumer kind of psyche research that we've gotten from a partner, Lisa Miller and Associates. It's a mindset shift, and people are shifting to more anxious, not less anxious, as this thing has gone on. And that really is because of what happened in late June, early July, when the spikes after Memorial Day happened across many states, Texas definitely being one of them. So what you have to remember when you think about what's happening today and the sales recovery, if you will, is you still have at least 10, if not 15% of restaurants closed if you counted independents. You only have them open at 50% capacity for the most part. And in states like California and New York, you're still only outdoor dining. And so those really anxious people are definitely not out the door yet. You still haven't captured them. And even some of the ones that were wait and see, or maybe first ones out, they too are only, in some cases, only doing it because you're at 50%. Or I can eat outside. So it is, there's a lot of caveats to this new foundation that's drawing people out, and that's helping that recovery. The concerns, as I've mentioned, are reflected in sales. They absolutely are. You had decent growth. New York, DC, Maryland, for those states that have yet to really fully reopen and were slower to do that because of the obvious, because of the huge cases in those states. Especially New York, you see lower still, but making significant progress over time in states like Texas, Florida, Georgia, now lagging a little bit. So for the road ahead, and what do we do? What do we do with all this, and how do we make sense of all this? Is there a road ahead, and what else can we be telling you that our research is demonstrating? First and foremost, I can promise you that this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Many have probably studied this in college, and it's one of my favorite things to look at, because I think ultimately restaurants are a place where love and belonging happens, breaking bread around a table with family and friends, building esteem, feeling of accomplishment can happen from either working or being in restaurants. Just being seen and self-actualization can actually happen in restaurants. I firmly believe that. But today, none of that matters if I don't feel safe. And so it's really trust and forgiveness will happen if I feel safe in your restaurants. This is a survey we conducted with our own members on one of our webinars. I can tell you some of these numbers doubled in just a couple months' time. 77% taking temperatures was 50%, around 50% just a couple short months ago. Almost everyone now requiring masks for all staff. All these things have grown significantly over time as this pandemic has endured. Masks now even required of customers in these major brands, which is really bold and not without complications. So it should be recognized as really courageous and bold because it is hard to enforce the standards today. There is no doubt that it is really hard to enforce the standard of wearing masks. And you see customers and guests that don't agree with it really either not complying or getting frustrated with staff, managers, the company as a whole. So it's not easy, but we are seeing those doing everything possible to say we're going to keep each other safe and we're going to keep our customers safe. The themes in social have followed. It was mask expectations back in May when masks first became a thing, and then a lot of commentary about masks. We'd all like to not be talking about them as much as we are still. It started to pivot to service when restaurants started opening back up with a bit of a halo for people that were, out there waiting on and taking care of other guests. The guests were noticing that and appreciative of it, to July with now the question about more cases. More than ever, cleanliness is at the forefront of everyone's mind. Remember that social advocacy is also really important to the customers and consumers, and they talked about that as well. So we pulled this right from the social platforms, Facebook, Google, Twitter. This is our guest intelligence product where we track what's happening in social for our customers. And it matters. It matters to your employees and it matters to your customers. So just to complicate things further in this pandemic, this is now at the forefront of everyone's minds. Research that says in the past 7 days, those that visited in the past 7 days, what did they feel good about with their visits and what did they not feel great about? And frankly, there is some good things here. You see one of the highest incidents in the way of complaints was customers not wearing their masks, not necessarily employees not wearing their masks. In fact, employees not wearing masks in a restaurant establishment was only about 15% of customers complained. So not a lot of not wearing them or not wearing them properly, which we all know we've seen. So that seems to be good. Customers not social distancing was higher for retail, not that high for restaurants. So also good in the way that restaurants have really worked hard to pave out tables, separate tables, pull out tables, all those things. The favorite item was not on the menu. I find fascinating because I actually think that the consumers, though they've said it and called it out, it was actually 30% or so, I think, in this research that said the item I wanted wasn't there. But I also think they understand that. So if there was ever any time to really try and continue to help the staff execute in this pandemic, limiting menu items is absolutely still a good strategy, my opinion, my belief only, but it does come up from customers. It doesn't come up necessarily in social or complaints because food scores, as you'll see in a minute here, have actually gone up, and so has service scores. And it's the next slide. So positive scores in food, in service, and in ambiance are really evident, of course, an intent to return. And I think that is perhaps, so even though I didn't maybe get the item I wanted, I'm still giving you credit. And I'm still giving you better food scores than I was the month, 2 months prior, 3 months prior, which we see as a really good sign of support. I think if I can count on you, I will probably give you credit for that. In fact, the biggest, one of the biggest areas or one of the biggest jumps you can see here is that we believe clean is the new ambiance. In the very beginning, we saw restaurants really struggle and reach out to us and say, but I've got an elevated experience. How can I put a mark on a table or pull out a table or have my employees wearing masks? That's not our experience. That's not the ambiance I'm trying to create. Well, clean is the new ambiance, and clean will surpass any other subtle or appropriate cue for your brand. Clean is that cue today, and that will supersede all else and get you better results today. In fact, we looked, and those with the best cleanliness scores had the best sales in July when we looked at top quartile and bottom quartile for both full and limited service. And casual dining, interestingly enough, had the best cleanliness scores in July, with fine dining and upscale not faring as well. And then this last section really just wanted to speak to the innovation that is happening. I say it all the time, restaurant industry, restaurant operators are scrappy. They're smart. they're innovative, and frankly, they're resilient. And so what you see in this pandemic is that not only are those that are not hurting as much figuring it out, but even those that are hurting have figured out ways to continue to survive in this pandemic and think about things they hadn't done before. So we found this was interesting. We also did this little quick poll, Hotspot, on a webinar sponsored by Hot Schedules and Fourth for us. We asked through that, they asked the question, what are you doing during this pandemic? And you could look at it and say, well, 40% are still trying to survive, which we know is the case. We absolutely know that's the case. But if you flip it, 51% are working on strategy, either things that they already were working on before this or things they could never get to and have time now to get to them because of COVID. And one of the things that we see that is probably the most dramatic, aside from the obvious third-party delivery adoption, mobile app adoption, all those things have happened, catapulted, the pandemic has created increases that you never would have seen in off-premise dining or third-party delivery dining. You never would have seen it this fast had it not been for the pandemic. But the other thing that I think you will see happen at a much faster clip going forward is the predominance of host, ghost, or now dark kitchens. And there's lots of versions out there. There's lots of brands. And I'll give you this next slide and ask the question, what do they have in common? Because they are not household names, but they are brands that have launched in the last 30 to 45 to 90 days as a part of another well-known brands, but these are virtual brands only. No capital, they are delivery only, and they are brands with logos and a positioning statement and a need that they fill in the country, in the world with their food. And it's fascinating to watch the growth here. So there are places like Franklin Junction here, run by another company, but Franklin Junction is about, they're like saying they're the Match.com of restaurants, where they are taking restaurants with excess capacity in their kitchens, which a lot of people have right now, and they're figuring out how to make different brand foods in those kitchens and deliver it. So taking excess capacity with excess need and finding matches, which is, again, just fascinating. So you can look up any of these brands and read their story and why they exist, and just see how quick the launch of these brands has been because of COVID and because there's been some time given to let's go be bold, let's get these things out there, get these new things out there. So lastly, will the industry ever be the same? We get this question all the time as well. And here's the latest in themes that we see. Recovery, absolutely a delicate word, and it's going to take longer. Consumers are about delivering on safety. It's the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's not the top right now. Digital innovation is table stakes. Figure out how to get your food in more people's hands more often with whatever vehicle makes sense. But it is about digital innovation to do so, digital marketing, digital innovation via your apps. And then ghost, host, and dark kitchens will continue to become really, I think, something to watch, because people are going to look to use to repurpose their space or to lease their buildings differently when they have to struggle or maybe close something down. And then finally, probably not enough attention here, in my opinion, when you look at the innovation that's happening, because workforce innovation is a must. The model is complicated and does require more attention. It has for a while. Turnover rates and understaffing rates have just been something that has been a problem for a really long time. Those, I think, are the trends as we see them today. We could go on and on, but in the interest of time, that's kind of how we've laid it out and the latest in our data and what our findings are. Lastly, I would tell you that, again, being a part of this industry in different capacities, it is scrappy. There's resilience like none other. I like to look at this and think, is this someone at the end of the game that's looking at that first half? It has not been a pretty first half for any of us, but I also think there's optimism, and that resilience will continue, that grit will continue. And I'd like to think this is the end of the game where we're looking back and he's smiling, because there's a win still in all of this, that we learned from it, and there's still wins to happen in the midst of really just a crazy, devastating time for so many. So with that, please reach out, email us if we can help you. We are here to help. Again, it's our passion to help operators do good, do better, and certainly come out of this stronger on the other side. So thank you so much to the Texas Restaurant Association Marketplace. Thanks for having me. And I think, Ariel, we might have maybe time for a question or two.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Kelly. I know I enjoyed that and it was very informative. And we have quite a few attendees. But we do have just one question that came through. And guys, if you do have any questions, feel free to ask now. But we have a question from Nathan. And the question is, could the fact that wine and liquor be number 3 on one of your slides, I'm assuming, compared to the rest of the country be due to alcohol to go from restaurants?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. I think that it's really small in terms of what alcohol what off premise has been for alcohol. It's awesome that a lot of states have loosened up. And I know there's lots of conversations about how to help restaurants be able to deliver even after this, deliver alcohol even after this. I'd say it's probably really small as a percentage, because when we look at full service sales and alcohol sales, they're just not even near where they were. The other fact that I heard not too long ago is that 96% of sales is coming from C-stores, is coming from retail, not necessarily coming from restaurants, bar sales, in restaurant sales. So that may have been a while ago, but it's clearly flipped and completely on its side in terms of the ratio of alcohol beverages sold in restaurants right now. Could have a little bit of an impact. It's a great question.
Thank you. Thank you. And okay, we just had another question come in from Tara. And the question is, with wineries, breweries, and distilleries limited in direct sales with food sales, do you see an opportunity to build catering programs around that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think catering in the short term may feel a little bit, you have to be careful with the perception of catering being buffets and feeding multiple people, because that right now feels like it goes a little bit against what we should be doing. So that but catering in general, delivery in general, absolutely. There's an opportunity to just keep pushing that, find ways to push out, delivery, working with the third-party deliverers. I think perhaps there's more compromises to make now than ever for smaller brands, independents, to really reach out and find ways to get your food out there off premise. Sure.
Perfect. Thank you, Kelly. And we do have another question that came in. And this question is from Jonathan. And the question is, what type of sales trends are you seeing on virtual concepts?
Good question, and don't know yet. I haven't seen any sales. So the brands, it's funny, there are some of those brands, the parent brands or the brands behind those virtual brands are customers of ours. We're still working on, they're so new that we're still working on how to get all that and start to track that as well. There have been quotes out there. If you look up some of those brands, you might be able to find a little bit more about it, but I wouldn't be able to safely quote what the sales for those brands is yet.
Perfect. Thank you. Awesome. That's all the questions that we have. If anybody does come up with a question or it pops in your brain later, feel free to message us and we will get an answer to you. And of course, as Kelly mentioned, feel free to visit the website, blackboxintelligence.com. Kelly, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you to all our viewers. Again, check out the TRA Marketplace schedule online and tune in to the rest of the webinars that we have. I know on this stage we have another webinar at 3:30, and so stay tuned for that, and we will see you guys here in just a little bit. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Bye, guys.